Please let me introduce you to Mr. Jonathan Little, who will share with you two specific stories of heroism that required agape love or forgiveness, or both, in the face of life's challenges. Mr. Jonathan Little enjoyed a long and successful career in radio as a newsman, disc jockey, music director, program director, operations manager, general manager, and owner. In 1998, Mr. Little left radio management and helped launch Troy Research, a consumer opinion market research company that does worldwide entertainment and media research for radio, television, and movie clients, including Sony Motion Pictures. In 2021, he bought the company. Troy Research continues to serve its clients with opinion research and perceptual studies, with Mr. Little in the role of president. Jonathan Little has been recognized with a number of awards over the years, including the honor of being inducted into the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame. Please let me introduce Mr. Jonathan Little.
Well, thank you for that. I didn't realize I had done all those things. Agape love and forgiveness, two ancient concepts. Agape love and forgiveness, somehow they've been missed in the social sciences until recently. Agape love and forgiveness, ancient and yet so renewing for the heart and the community in our modern times. In these modern times, the strong consensus seems to be this: if there is a problem, then do something about it by changing the environment. If some people are without a home, then build them a home. If some people yell too much, then help them behaviorally to stop yelling. What is too often missed by the strict environmental and behavioral approach is this: we must not neglect the human heart when such change is necessary. The late Millard Fuller started Habitat for Humanity, the builder of houses for poor people. Years ago, he met with Dr. Bob Enright, who studies forgiveness and who will greet you here today very soon. Mr. Fuller said this to Dr. Enright: "We build the houses, you build the hearts. Unless we build the hearts, they cannot stay in the homes." Think about that for a moment. Unless we build the hearts, they cannot stay in the homes. Do you see that the environmental solution is incomplete until the matters of the heart are confronted? Mr. Fuller was saying this: when people's inner world is devastated by anger, deep sadness, anguish from not receiving enough love in the heart, then they do not have the strong will to make a sustained life in the home possible. In other words, those without homes not only need a home, they also need surgery of the heart. By surgery of the heart, I do not mean a medical operation. More importantly, I mean that they need to clean out from their inner being all of those angers, hatreds, deep longings for meaningful human connection that they lack. A home they now will have, but what now of the heart? This unique conference, never before tried anywhere in the world, to our knowledge, is about healing the heart through forgiveness and strengthening the heart through the practice of agape love. Forgiveness and agape love. These are two of the most important ideas for humanity, and sadly, they are too often neglected, misunderstood, and even at times rejected in too many communities in our world today. It's time to change that. It is time, as Millard Fuller said, to build the hearts. If you pay attention to the ideas on forgiveness and agape love across these 2 days, you might find that your own heart is starting to change for the better. You might find that your heart is strengthening. It is then that you might decide to bring forgiveness and agape love into your own family, into your own community for good. It is time. For too long, our modern world has found a way to ignore these two vital ideas of forgiveness and agape love. Let us awaken a sleeping world to the necessity of these ancient ideas that are always new. In these challenging times, let us show the modern world, with all its modern conveniences, that there is more to life than environmental and behavioral solutions. Let us show the world that the inner world of the heart is a path to vitality and a path to peace. It is time. Let us now meet two heroic people who were abused by others and yet found their way to both agape love and forgiveness, setting themselves free from a resentment that might have destroyed them. I have two case studies to share with you. First, I want to introduce you to David Keel. His story is forgotten by most people because that story was published in a magazine called Decisions in 1986. That publication is no longer available. It's time to reintroduce Mr. Keel to the world. In 1977, Mr. Keel was collecting a debt for a local company. He was in the living room of a person who owed $13. When Mr. Keel asked for the $13, the customer shouted, "Nobody's going to rip me off." He stormed off. Mr. Keel waited for the man to return when suddenly there was a deafening explosion. When he finally awoke, Mr. Keel was on the floor. He could not move. Blood was streaming from his mouth. When he awoke again, he was in a hospital bed. The shot permanently paralyzed him from the upper chest downward. He would never walk again. For a debt of $13, Mr. Keel's life was changed forever. He then was transferred to the State Rehabilitation Center. Mr. Keel found himself ruminating on the person who had destroyed his way of life. His thoughts centered on this: here I am, unable to care for many of my own personal needs, and the man who shot me is still walking around out there on two good legs and feet. It is not fair. It was not reasonable in the least. These constant thoughts were destroying Mr. Keel from within. In his own words, I became nervous and irritable, overcome. Life around me was crumbling. He saw that his bitterness was poisoning him. In other words, it was not just the event itself that was destroying him. Instead, it was his own inner torment that was constantly within him that was his main tormentor. Here's an important lesson for all of us. It was not the injustice of the shooting that was the most serious cause of David Keel's crumbling. Instead, it was the effects, that which comes after the unjust action, that were bringing him down. I want you to see that it was his own inner world, the constant thoughts of what happened, the bitterness, the hatred of the man, that was his greatest challenge in life. Mr. Keel could do nothing about the event of injustice that paralyzed him. After all, it happened, and it could not be reversed. Yet he came to realize that he could do something about those effects that were destroying him from within. At that point, he decided to forgive, for the possibility that this could help save his life. Again, in his words, as I did forgive, a degree of compassion for him grew within me. he saw that the man who shot him was worse off than he himself was, because the other man had to live with the reality of having ruined another person's way of life. It was good that Mr. Keel was learning the pathway to forgive, because soon after this, another horrible injustice befell him. To make matters worse, his wife announced that she could no longer live with a husband who was a quadriplegic. She filed for divorce, took custody of their children, took most of the furniture, and Mr. Keel now was left alone in an empty house. In his words, many nights I maneuvered my wheelchair in circles in the middle of the living room. He was unable to find a job, so he had to depend on the meager funds given to him by the state for his survival. Even with the practice of forgiving, he struggled with depression, self-pity, and bitterness. Forgiveness takes time and effort. We must be patient with the forgiveness journey. As Mr. Keel relates, my struggles with my attitude became easier. The circumstances were the same, but I was improving. It was at this point that Mr. Keel made the decision to find new meaning and new purpose in his life. The forgiving of the one who shot him and of his wife leaving him led him to begin investing time and love in other people's lives. He reached out to others to make their lives better, and in doing so, in offering love that was difficult and even painful for him, he found that the hurts inside me slowly healed. Today, they are not as painful as they were. I have grown. Yes, David Keel has grown as a person. He has grown in his humanity as he cultivates more forgiveness and more love toward other people. For me, learning to forgive has been a long, lengthy process. I know today that bitterness is something I simply cannot afford to have in my life. Forgiveness and learning to love saved his life. That is the case study of David Keel. Case study number 2. February 7th, 1992, in the Philippines, an unthinkable experience happened to Joy Tonchi Mendoza that drastically changed her life and the lives of her family. The day went by as normal until the doorbell rang about 6 o'clock in the evening. The gate was opened for Joy's father's cousin to deliver 5 sacks of rice, which was a typical routine he did every month. At that same time, 10 uninvited men sneaked unnoticed through the gate. They were all massively armed with guns and knives. That night, Joy's parents were out of town on business. Joy's younger brother, 2 younger sisters, and some relatives and visitors were in the house. Some of the uninvited men forcefully marched to the front door, while the other intruders dispersed themselves to different parts of the house to make certain no one in the house could escape. It was the beginning of 2 hours of horror. 14 people in the house were all tied up in the living room, except for Joy. She, at the time, was in the bathroom in her parents' bedroom, which was far from the living room. Although not witnessing the tumultuous motion in the living room, she could sense that something was wrong because of the sounds of quick footsteps and unfamiliar voices slowly becoming apparent. Joy went out from her bedroom, and as she walked down the long hallway, she saw a man running toward her. Joy tried to hide herself, but the man entered the room and yelled at her for hiding. With a gun, he demanded jewelry and money. Joy was then sexually assaulted in her own bed by 7 men. Joy's parents decided not to pursue a criminal case. The decision was based on the belief that it would protect Joy's emotional well-being from further destruction. Not too many years later, the family received a report that the members of the gang who intruded into their house were arrested, and some were even killed. For Joy and her family, justice had been served. The key insight for Joy was her understanding that keeping this injustice a secret, keeping it buried inside of her, would only damage her own inner world. Bringing what happened to sympathetic others seemed to be a path toward healing. As she cried many nights, her emotional burden began to change when she considered the possibility of forgiving the men. Joy did not see forgiveness as excusing the offender's evil actions or approving their evil choices. Joy relates in different interviews, in her blog, and in a published book the following processes in her forgiveness journey. Number one, she relied on her earlier insight when she was 9 years old that she is loved. This insight prepared her heart to respond to the tragedy. Number two, as she realized that she had fallen short of human perfection, she had the insight that the men had also fallen short, and for this she felt pity toward them. Of course, she never equated her own failings with the men's failings, which were far worse than hers. With the same kind of forgiveness that Joy had received from God for her own injustice toward others, she was able to forgive the men who hurt her. Number four, although she continued to feel emotional pain, she says that there was no residual bitterness. 5, she is now aware that her process of forgiving has led her not to be chained to the offense against her. She set herself free by making the choice to forgive. Not everyone in her situation would choose to forgive, but this was her choice. She gave it careful thought about what forgiveness is and what it can accomplish in a very powerful way. Forgiveness for Joy does not merely heal the broken and wounded person who chooses to forgive. It also heals what is broken and damaged in our world. 3 activities that have emerged from her trauma are: she helps the victims of incest, sexual abuse, and rape. She is involved in serving families that are experiencing hard times. And she maintains her own website, Teach with Joy, in which she shares her failures, victories, and celebrates her joys in life. That's the case study of Joy Tan Chi Mendoza.